do want her to know who her biological father is, and I'm disappointed, Miss Butler. Aya's was his, but Nyana, you're pretty confident about?
Yes. I really feel like she's his. I do.
You're wrong.
But I did thought both of the kids was yours. Like, we always had sex without no condom.
I really am. You a mother.
No, she's not. No, she's not at all.
I do love my kids.
Don't have
though.
a clue what being a mother is.
I love my kids.
The duties of a mother, doing the best you can, or whether you are just simply wallowing in dysfunction that prevents you from being the mother you know you should be. You are the children's mother if they came out your body. And I'm really disappointed at what I'm seeing from you. I know you're not that old.
This courtroom case unfolds under the firm guidance of Judge Lauren Lake, where a deeply complicated paternity dispute forces every person present to confront uncomfortable truths. The matter before the court is not just about biology, but about responsibility, trust, denial, and the long-term emotional damage caused when adults refuse to face facts. From the very beginning, it becomes clear that this is one of those cases where a DNA test is not just evidence, but a turning point that will permanently reshape lives. The court hears from a mother who arrives confident, almost defiant, repeatedly insisting that she already knows the truth. In her mind, there is no doubt about who the biological father is. She believes the case is unnecessary and that the DNA test will simply confirm what she has been saying all along. However, as Judge Lauren Lake carefully listens, it becomes apparent that this confidence is built on shaky ground. Past behavior, overlapping relationships, and contradictory statements slowly raise serious questions. This is a classic example of why people regret taking DNA tests, because the truth has a way of exposing what denial tries to bury. The alleged father presents a very different position. He explains to the court that while he once believed he might be the child's father, events surrounding the pregnancy created doubt. He speaks about the unstable nature of the relationship, the lack of trust, and the confusion caused by multiple possible partners during the conception window. His testimony highlights the relationship between law and justice, showing how personal emotions must be set aside so facts can take center stage. Judge Lake makes it clear that this court does not operate on feelings, assumptions, or hopes. It operates on evidence. As the case progresses, the courtroom becomes an evidence stage in a divorce-like dispute, even though the couple is not married. Financial support, emotional presence, and parental responsibility are all discussed. The father explains why he distanced himself, while the mother accuses him of abandonment. Judge Lake questions both sides sharply, emphasizing that children pay the price when adults treat parenthood casually. The court atmosphere reflects the concept of justice in jurisprudence, where accountability matters just as much as biological connection. The discussion moves into painful territory when the child's life is examined. The court learns who has been present, who has been missing, and how the absence of certainty has affected the child's stability. Judge Lake expresses concern about how unresolved paternity can lead to confusion, insecurity, and long-term emotional harm. This moment mirrors themes often discussed on the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where real people confront how hidden truths disrupt families. The court also addresses financial responsibility and future obligations. The topic of Supreme Court child support principles is indirectly raised as Judge Lake explains that once paternity is legally established, responsibility cannot be avoided. She reminds both parties that the court's role is not punishment, but protection, especially for the child, who has no voice in these decisions. Throughout the proceedings, Judge Lake confronts the mother about inconsistencies in her testimony. Past claims, previous denials and shifting narratives weaken her credibility. This leads to a discussion similar to what legal professionals call adverse inference in evidence act, where credibility issues can influence how testimony is weighed. While DNA is scientific, behavior still matters when determining truthfulness and accountability. The emotional weight of the case intensifies as Judge Lake reflects on broader social issues. She speaks about how unresolved paternity disputes are common, how DNA test cheating stories flood courtrooms, and how children often become collateral damage. Her words echo themes from Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where acknowledgement of mistakes becomes the first step toward healing. She urges both parties to stop focusing on blame and start focusing on responsibility. When the DNA results are finally introduced, the courtroom reaches a moment of absolute silence. This is the point where denial meets reality. For one party, the results bring validation. For the other, they bring shock. This is why people say DNA tests change everything. Years of argument, suspicion, and emotional chaos are reduced to a scientific conclusion that cannot be argued away. Judge Lauren Lake delivers the results with clarity and authority, reminding the father that missing time can never be recovered, but accountability must begin immediately. She also addresses the mother directly, emphasizing that honesty from the beginning could have spared everyone unnecessary pain. This moment reflects discussions often heard on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where legal truth forces emotional reckoning. The case does not end with celebration or relief. It ends with responsibility. Judge Lake explains that legal fatherhood comes with expectations, including emotional presence, financial support, and long-term commitment. The court makes it clear that walking away is no longer an option. This decision reshapes the future for everyone involved, reinforcing the idea that the law exists to protect children, not adult egos. As the courtroom prepares to move on, Judge Lake reflects on how many similar cases she has seen. She notes that adoption stories' full episodes often begin with situations like this, where instability forces children into uncertain futures. Her message is direct. Truth delayed is truth denied, and denial always costs more in the end. This case stands as a powerful reminder that the justice system does not exist to validate feelings, but to uncover facts. It shows how personal relationships collapse under dishonesty, how children suffer from unresolved questions, and why courts rely on DNA when words fail. Above all, it demonstrates that once the truth is revealed, there is no returning to the comfort of lies. As the courtroom absorbs the DNA results, the emotional tone shifts from argument to accountability. Judge Lauren Lake makes it clear that this court is not interested in who feels embarrassed or vindicated, but in what happens next for the child. The ruling marks a legal conclusion, but not an emotional one. This is where many people realize why people regret taking DNA tests, because once the truth is confirmed, excuses no longer hold weight. Judge Lake addresses the father directly, emphasizing that biology is only the beginning of responsibility. She explains that fatherhood is not activated by a piece of paper alone. It is defined by consistent presence, protection, and effort. This moment strongly reflects discussions often heard on the relationship between law and justice, where legal truth creates moral obligation. The court does not simply identify a parent, it expects that parent to act. Attention then turns back to the mother, whose repeated insistence that she knew the truth all along is carefully examined. Judge Lake points out that certainty without honesty can be just as damaging as denial. By avoiding clarity earlier, the mother prolonged instability, forcing the court to step in. This mirrors themes from the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where individuals learn that delaying truth does not soften its impact, it multiplies it. The courtroom discussion broadens beyond this single family. Judge Lake explains that cases like this are common, particularly where relationships are unstable and boundaries unclear. She references how often courts hear DNA test cheating stories, where overlapping relationships create doubt and conflict. These patterns are not unique, but their consequences are always personal, especially for children who grow up questioning their identity. The judge then outlines the legal implications of the ruling. With paternity established, child support obligations become unavoidable. While not referencing a specific ruling, Judge Lake reinforces principles consistent with Supreme Court child support standards, explaining that support is not optional, negotiable, or emotional. It is a legal duty designed to protect the child's future. She reminds the father that financial responsibility is not punishment, it is participation. As the case unfolds further, Judge Lake reflects on how the courtroom itself becomes an evidence stage in divorce case. Like conflicts, even when no marriage exists. Emotional arguments, character attacks, and blame shifting are common, but they do not override scientific proof. The DNA test stands above personal narratives, forcing everyone involved to confront facts rather than feelings. The judge also highlights credibility issues raised during testimony. Inconsistencies, past denials, and selective memory weaken trust. This leads to a broader legal lesson similar to adverse inference in Evidence Act principles, where unreliable testimony damages a party's position. While DNA determines biology, credibility determines how the court views responsibility and future cooperation. Judge Lake's tone becomes more instructive as she addresses both parties together. She explains that unresolved paternity disputes often lead to long-term emotional damage, not only for children but for parents as well. She references how many adults later appear in court as part of adoption stories' full episodes, seeking answers they were denied as children. Her warning is clear: unresolved truth creates generational consequences. The father expresses a desire to make up for lost time, acknowledging that he has already missed milestones he can never reclaim. Judge Lake responds firmly, stating that remorse without action is meaningless. She stresses that rebuilding trust takes consistency, not promises. This exchange reflects ideas often discussed on the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where legal accountability forces behavioral change. The mother, meanwhile, struggles with the reality that certainty does not equal credibility. Judge Lake challenges her to reflect on her choices and how they contributed to confusion. The judge emphasizes that motherhood includes responsibility for clarity, not just care. This moment echoes themes from Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where acknowledgement of mistakes becomes essential for growth and healing. As the court moves toward closure, Judge Lake speaks directly about the child's future. She explains that identity, stability, and emotional security depend on adults doing better moving forward. The court's decision provides a foundation, but the work ahead belongs to the parents. She stresses that the justice system cannot raise children, it can only define responsibility. Judge Lake then reinforces the concept of justice in jurisprudence, explaining that justice is not about winning or losing a case, but about restoring balance where harm has occurred. In paternity disputes, the harmed party is often invisible, the child, whose needs outweigh adult conflict. This perspective reframes the entire case, shifting focus from blame to duty. The courtroom atmosphere grows quiet as the implications sink in. What began as an argument over biology ends as a lesson in accountability. The DNA test did more than answer a question. It removed uncertainty, exposed avoidance, and forced a future built on facts rather than assumptions. This is why so many people fear DNA testing, because it leaves no room to hide. Judge Lake concludes by reminding both parties that the court's involvement ends today, but parenting does not. She urges them to seek counseling, education, and legal compliance to prevent further harm. Her final remarks emphasize that children remember who showed up, not who argued the loudest. This case stands as a powerful example of how truth operates in the courtroom. It demonstrates why DNA evidence is so central to family law, how personal behavior influences legal outcomes, and why responsibility cannot be postponed. Above all, it reinforces a simple but difficult reality. When the truth is revealed, life must move forward, whether people are ready or not. As the courtroom session nears its end, Judge Lauren Lake takes a moment to address the deeper meaning behind the case. What unfolded was not merely a legal dispute over paternity, but a clear demonstration of how unresolved truth slowly erodes families. The DNA test answered the question of biology, but it also exposed years of avoidance, emotional immaturity, and the consequences of decisions made without regard for the child at the center of it all. Judge Lake explains that cases like this represent a recurring pattern in family courts. Adults often come in convinced they already know the truth, only to be confronted with evidence that challenges their certainty. This is why people regret taking DNA tests, not because the test is wrong, but because it strips away narratives built to protect pride. Once the truth is revealed, responsibility can no longer be delayed or redirected. The court revisits how the conflict escalated to this point. Repeated denials, unstable relationships, and inconsistent stories forced legal intervention. Judge Lake emphasizes that when parents fail to resolve paternity privately, the justice system must step in. This reflects the unavoidable relationship between law and justice, where the law becomes the tool used to restore order when personal accountability collapses. Judge Lake reminds both parties that the courtroom is not a place for emotional performances. It is an evidence stage in a divorce case. Like environment, even when marriage is not involved, facts matter more than feelings, and science outweighs speculation. DNA evidence does not negotiate, compromise, or sympathize. It simply reveals the truth. Turning her attention to the father, Judge Lake speaks about the weight of missed time. She explains that while the court can legally establish paternity in minutes, it cannot restore months or years of absence. The ruling brings clarity, but it also brings obligation. This moment highlights why discussions on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast often stress that legal outcomes are only meaningful when followed by real-world action. The father acknowledges that the truth forces him to confront uncomfortable realities. Judge Lake responds firmly, stating that acknowledgement is only the first step. She outlines expectations moving forward: emotional involvement, financial support, and consistent presence. These expectations align with foundational principles behind Supreme Court child support doctrine, where the child's needs outweigh parental conflict or regret. The mother is also confronted with the consequences of her actions. Judge Lake addresses how repeated certainty, when unsupported by honesty, caused confusion and harm. She explains that truth delayed is not kindness, it is neglect. This lesson mirrors stories often shared on the Truth Changes Everything podcast, where individuals discover that protecting a lie only deepens future pain. Judge Lake goes further, explaining how credibility plays a vital role even when DNA evidence exists. Inconsistent testimony weakens trust and complicates co-parenting. She references legal reasoning similar to adverse inference in Evidence Act, where unreliable behavior influences how future disputes may be viewed by the court. While DNA settles biology, credibility determines cooperation. The discussion expands to the broader impact on children raised amid uncertainty. Judge Lake reflects on how many adults later appear in court seeking answers about their identity. These cases often lead into adoption stories full episodes, where unresolved paternity shapes entire lives. Her message is clear. Children deserve clarity early, not explanations decades later. The emotional tone of the courtroom shifts from confrontation to reflection. Both parties begin to understand that the ruling is not an ending, but a beginning. Judge Lake stresses that parenting requires maturity beyond legal compliance. She encourages both individuals to seek growth, referencing themes similar to Celebrate Recovery testimonies, where change begins with honest self-examination. Judge Lake also addresses the culture of denial surrounding infidelity and overlapping relationships. She explains how courts repeatedly hear DNA test cheating stories, each one leaving emotional wreckage behind. These stories are not entertainment, they are warnings. The judge urges both parties to recognize that children are not consequences to be managed, but lives to be protected. As the case concludes, Judge Lake reinforces the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice, she explains, is not about shamming or winning arguments. It is about restoring balance, establishing responsibility, and protecting the most vulnerable party, the child. The court's ruling serves that purpose by replacing uncertainty with truth. Judge Lake makes it clear that the justice system cannot force parents to love their children, but it can require them to be accountable. The DNA test removed doubt. What follows is a choice. The father must choose presence over absence. The mother must choose honesty over defensiveness. The child deserves nothing less. In her closing remarks, Judge Lake emphasizes that today's ruling will shape the child's future identity, security, and emotional foundation. She reminds both parents that children remember consistency, not courtroom promises. This final message echoes many real-life outcomes discussed across legal and recovery platforms, where accountability, not words, defines redemption. The courtroom session ends quietly, without celebration or triumph. The truth has been spoken, recorded, and enforced. What remains is the responsibility to act on it. This case stands as a powerful reminder that DNA tests do more than identify parents. They expose character, demand growth, and permanently change the path forward. In the end, the court did what it was designed to do: uncover the truth and assign responsibility. Whether that truth leads to healing or continued conflict depends entirely on the choices made after the ruling. And as Judge Lauren Lake makes unmistakably clear, the child's future will be shaped not by what happened in the past, but by what happens next.